Hey everyone, welcome in. We're going to do a deep dive today, and we're going to be talking about Johnny Cash. Not just, walk the line Johnny Cash, but like really try to understand him.
Yeah, going a little deeper than just the greatest hits.
Totally. And we've got some cool stuff to work with today.
We do. We've got his Wikipedia entry to give us, like, the rundown of his life. But what I'm really excited about is we're also going to be using lyrics from Man in Black, kind of as a way to understand, like, his worldview and his activism.
Interesting. Okay, so right off the bat, Cash was like more than just a country star, right? He kind of like transcended genres.
Definitely.
But what always gets me is like this Man in Black persona, was that like just about the clothes? It seems like it was deeper than that.
Not at all. Those black clothes, they were a statement,
Uh,
a symbol of solidarity with those that were struggling, those that were forgotten. He wore black for the poor, for prisoners, for anyone who felt like invisible to society.
oh.
He even says it right. I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town.
Wow. Okay, so it's like his clothing was literally a manifestation of his social conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
To like really understand, we got to rewind, right? Like start at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
Cash's story begins in like rural Arkansas
Oh, yeah.
during the Depression. Can you imagine?
Tough times.
Born into poverty so deep that it like shapes your whole understanding of the world.
Yeah, it's foundational.
And then you layer on the tragedy of losing his older brother Jack in an accident. Cash was only 12. And like he carried that guilt with him his whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in his music, too. You hear that struggle, that search for redemption in so many of his songs, like Folsom Prison Blues, for instance. It's
Yeah.
not just, a catchy tune, right? It's raw, it's honest, and it grapples with guilt and regret.
Huh.
Those lyrics, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. They're chilling.
Yeah.
And knowing Cash's own personal struggles with guilt, I mean, they hit even harder.
Wow. I never made that connection before, but it really adds another dimension to his music.
Yeah, it's true. His life and his art were, like, deeply intertwined.
So we've got this hardship, right? But then there's music, gospel music, radio. That was his world early on.
Huge influences, for sure.
But then he finds his own voice through songwriting.
And what a voice.
Mm.
Powerful, unforgettable, one of a kind.
Right.
But we can't forget those early days in Memphis at Sun Records.
Oh, yeah. With Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins, that whole crew.
Legendary, right?
The $1 Million Quartet. That must have been something else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, imagine being in that room.
I can't even.
Some say, though, that Cash's deep baritone, that steady rhythm he had, it kind of grounded the session, like a counterpoint to Elvis's energy or Jerry Lee Lewis going crazy on the piano.
It's so glad.
Even then, he carved out his own space.
He had this quiet confidence, even among these, like, musical giants.
He knew who he was.
So he starts at Sun, then moves on to Columbia Records, starts having these huge hits. But this is also where things get a little, complicated.
Yeah.
The outlaw image starts appearing.
Well, outlaw country was this whole movement in the late 60s, early 70s. It was about rejecting that polished Nashville sound,
Yeah.
They were rebels, singing about, like, real-life heartache, hard living, questioning everything.
And Cash fit right in. I mean, you've got the black clothes, this kind of rebellious attitude. And, of course, there are the run-ins with the law.
Right. But about those,
Yeah.
they get exaggerated sometimes. Don't get me wrong, Cash struggled, but a lot of it was a symptom of what he was dealing with internally,
Yeah.
The addiction, the demons. It all fueled the music, but it also led to some recklessness.
Like that time his camper started a forest fire.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not exactly role model behavior,
Not really.
but it shows how complex he was,
Yeah.
right? Deeply flawed, made mistakes, but he owned them. Never tried to hide his imperfections.
Yeah.
I think that's why people connected with him,
Yeah.
He was a flawed hero, relatable.
It was real.
Exactly.
But he wasn't out there committing serious crimes or anything like that.
Oh, no.
It was mostly drug-related. And he took responsibility.
He did. And actually, his song, San Quentin, came from his time in prison. It became a whole anthem, for the incarcerated.
Wow.
He used those experiences, even the bad ones, to connect with people who felt ostracized, forgotten.
That's incredible.
It was a really important part of his legacy, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
This unwavering commitment to social justice. It's easy to get caught up in the outlaw thing, but Cash cared deeply about the injustices he saw in the world.
And he wasn't quiet about it.
Not at all. And that's something we should dig into more. How he challenged prejudice, advocated for prisoners' rights. He was using his platform to lift up the marginalized,
I'm ready to hear all about it. This is fascinating. So we're talking about Johnny Cash and social justice, huh? I mean, he was singing about this stuff when it wasn't exactly like popular, especially in country music.
It was a different time, for sure. The Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War, tensions were high, and Cash, this country music star, jumps right into the middle of it.
Okay, so like the Ballad of Ira Hayes. This song tells the story of Ira Hayes, a Pima Native American who helped raise the flag at Iwo Jima, right? Comes home a hero, but faces all this racism, struggles with alcoholism. It's a heartbreaking story.
And Cash tells it with such empathy. It's a prime example of him shining a light on the injustice faced by Native Americans. This was 1964, remember. Segregation was still legal in parts of the U.S.
He was calling out the government, the music industry, even some of his own fans. That's pretty brave, especially back then.
He knew the risks, but he felt it deeply. Like he said in Man in Black, I wear the black for those who never had the chance, for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime but is there because he's a victim of the times. Those lines say it all, really.
And it wasn't just talk. He actually performed in prisons, advocating for prisoners' rights. Folsom Prison, San Quentin, those weren't just concerts, those were statements.
Totally. He
Uh,
connected with those audiences, shared his music with people who felt invisible to the rest of the world. Those concerts were legendary.
yeah, and Folsom Prison was huge for his career. Isn't that where a boy named Sue came from?
It is. He had this amazing ability to blend those lighthearted songs with serious social commentary. And let's not forget the Johnny Cash show.
Oh.
He had Bob Dylan on, Chris Christopherson, June Carter's family, the Carter family. He gave a platform to artists who were pushing boundaries, making people uncomfortable, just like him.
So speaking of making people uncomfortable, Bitter Tears, right?
Right.
His album about Native American struggles, didn't that cause some issues?
Oh, yeah, big time. Some radio stations refused to play it, said it was too controversial.
Can you imagine?
They thought an album about Native Americans was too radical for their listeners. Cash was furious. He even took out an ad in Billboard magazine calling them out for it.
That's wild.
He didn't back down, and his support for Native American communities went beyond music. He was even adopted by the Seneca Nation's Turtle Clan.
Wow. So his activism, it was personal. You know, it wasn't just about like being a celebrity with a cause.
Exactly. He lived his values, supporting the American Indian movement, refusing to censor artists like Chris Christopherson, who sang about marijuana use. Those were bold moves back then.
He was a true rebel, huh? But like, even with all this, his career had its ups and downs. The 70s, for example. Didn't his popularity dip?
It did a bit. The music scene was changing, disco was huge, and outlaw country was evolving. Plus, his personal struggles, the addiction, the pressure, it all took a toll.
Yeah, and he was really open about it too, which was pretty rare back then.
Yeah, in his autobiography, he talks about his struggles with amphetamines, being addicted to pills. He didn't shy away from the dark stuff.
So even though he wasn't like topping the charts as much, his impact was still there.
Absolutely. He never stopped writing, performing, connecting with audiences. And don't forget, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1980.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Youngest living inductee at the time, actually. But his story was far from over. He had this resurgence in the 80s, formed the Highwaymen with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson.
Oh, wow. The Highwaymen. That's like a country music supergroup.
Right. 4 legends, all with their own unique styles, coming together to make something truly special. 3 albums, tons of touring. They were a force.
What was their sound like? I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with their music.
It was amazing. 4 iconic voices blending together, sharing stories through song. A little rebellious, always heartfelt, totally captivating.
Man, I need to check them out. See, this is what I love about these deep dives, always learning something new.
It's the best. But back to Cash. Even with the Highwaymen's success, the 80s weren't his most commercially successful period. But they set the stage for something amazing.
You're talking about American recordings, right?
Yes. Working with Rick Rubin brought him back in a huge way.
It was such a perfect pairing.
Totally. Rubin got it.
Mm-hmm.
He understood the power of Cash's voice, the timelessness of his songwriting, stripped away all the excess, all the flash, and let Cash be Cash.
And the result was incredible. Those albums were huge, critically acclaimed, introduced him to a whole new generation. He was like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
That's a perfect way to put it. It shows his resilience, his ability to adapt, to reinvent himself without losing his core identity. But as we know, this chapter also had his share of sadness.
June.
Yeah. Losing June in 2003 was devastating. She was his everything, his love, his musical partner, his rock. But even in his grief, he kept creating.
He channeled it into his music, right? American Third, Solitary Man, American the Fourth, The Man Comes Around. Such powerful albums, even with that undercurrent of sadness.
Absolutely. And of course, there's Hurt.
Oh man, that video.
Haunting, isn't it? A Nine Inch Nails song, originally, but Cash's version took on a whole new meaning. It became this reflection on life, loss, regret, and ultimately a kind of peace.
One of the greatest music videos of all time, in my opinion. So raw, so honest, so powerful.
It's a testament to his enduring artistry. Even at the end of his life, he was still pushing boundaries, still connecting with people on this incredibly deep level.
It's a fitting tribute to a life well lived. So we've talked about his activism, his music, his impact on other artists. It's clear that Johnny Cash was more than just a musician.
Absolutely. He was an icon, a rebel, a voice for the voiceless.
All right, so we've spent all this time with Johnny Cash, and man, he was complicated, right? But what is it about his music that still hits so hard today?
It's a good question. I think, honestly, it's that his story, his music, it taps into something we all feel. This guy comes from nothing, struggles his whole life, goes through so much darkness, but he keeps fighting for what he believes in.
He never pretended to be some perfect guy either.
Never. And that, I think, made him even more real, you know?
Definitely. Owned his flaws, his mistakes, and just kept going.
Exactly. He was this total paradox, right? An outlaw who loved gospel. A country star singing about social justice when nobody else was. A man full of pain but brought so much light to the world.
And always, always that honesty just poured out of him. Never chasing trends, just singing his truth. Love, loss, injustice, whatever it was, you felt it.
And people responded to that across generations, which is amazing. He was a pioneer in the 50s, an outlaw in the 60s, winning Grammys in the 90s. He never stopped evolving.
That's such a good point. Never afraid to take risks, work with different people, always growing.
It's inspiring, really. Stay true to yourself, but don't be afraid to change.
So as we wrap this up, I keep thinking about his authenticity. In a world where everyone's trying to be perfect online, Johnny Cash was just himself. No filter.
Completely. And maybe even more importantly, he made it okay for everyone else to be themselves, too.
He really did. He once said, being defined by a genre is limiting. I'm an honest songwriter, and I write about what I see going on.
And he saw it all, didn't he? The good, the bad, the heartbreak, the hope.
Yeah.
It all went into the music.
And that's why it still matters. Because whether it was 50 years ago or today, that honesty, that rawness, it reminds us it's okay to be human, to not be perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who's, digging into Johnny Cash, I'd say this. Find what speaks to you, what part of his music makes you feel something, because in the end, that's the magic of it, right? That personal connection.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we're calling it a deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.